Now we're going to go ahead and texture some objects. Texturing in Max is accomplished through the material editor. That's where you create and apply textures. You can find it under rendering, material editor. You can also hit the keyboard shortcut M, or there is also the material editor icon on the toolbar. Bringing up the dialog box shows you a number of different materials. Now, materials really are a collection of bitmaps and shaders and that sort of thing that you can apply to an object to give it all sorts of color, bumpiness, that sort of thing. We'll get into this. Let's go through the window a little bit, and then we'll apply some materials to an object and then show how to tweak that. Well, first of all, we have all the materials are located here. You can have a lot more than 6 materials. Right now we're showing 6 at a time while we author that. We have a menu bar up here where we can get our materials, put it to the library, that sort of thing, navigation, some options, and some utilities. This button here along the right side allows us to show the material on a cylinder or a cube. There's also a way to show it on just about any other type of object you want. This turns on backlighting. This turns on a background, so it's helpful when you're doing opacity. This gives you different types of UV tiling when you start working with bitmaps. Color check. An options window. This is kind of nice. Now, one of the things you should notice is we've got the ability to view more. We can view it as 5x3, or you can view actually 6x4 up to 24 textures at a time. But there can be a lot more than that in the scene. This is really just how many you can edit at a time. I'm going to go back to 3x2. And that way we'll be able to see these fairly clearly. Along the bottom here, we've got some buttons here. One is to get material, put it to the scene, to the selection, so that applies it to an object. This kind of resets the map. This writes it to a library, and this shows it on the viewport. Well, I'm kind of talking out the side of my head here because really you should see how this works. So I'm going to close this for just a second, and we're going to create an object. I'm going to create a teapot. So there's a nice teapot. And now we're going to select the material and apply it to that teapot. I'm going to go back into my material editor. And now I'm going to hit this button that says Get Material. Well, what type of material am I going to get? If I want, I can create a brand new material, and I can create any one of these basic. In fact, let me show you here. There's a couple of different ways to view your materials. You can view it as a list. You view it as a list with icons, small or large icons. There are actually 2 things you can view in this material map browser, and those are materials and maps. So let's see, materials. Those are all of our materials. So we have all of these different types of materials, like a shellac, ray trace, blend, our standard material here. And we also have maps. And these, what's showing here are procedural maps, such as noise, the marbles, a cellular, the checker, those sorts of things. And we also can have bitmaps in here. Max and Discrete also provide a very nice material library that ships with every copy of Max. And if you've installed Max, you should have that material library. And there's a ton of materials in here. So anything from ground cover to metals to chromes to planets, and so on and so forth. So let's go ahead and take one of these materials and work with it. I'm going to go ahead and take this dirt material, and I'm just going to click it and drag it into my material editor so I can start working with it. So if I want to apply it to this teapot, all I have to do is select the teapot and either hit this button, which says Assign Material to Selection, or I can click and drag and drop on the teapot. Notice how the teapot changed color. But we're really not seeing the map at this point. Why is that? Well, we have this button here that says Show Map and Viewport. Let's go ahead and click that. And that allows us to see the maps in our viewport. Sometimes you don't want to show your maps, especially if you have a lot of them, might slow down your video card. So you might want to be very selective as to which ones you show and which ones you don't. For most scenes, it's probably not that big of a deal for most modern video cards, but that is an option that you have. Okay, let's go through our standard material, and we're going to show you a little bit about shaders. If you notice, this window kind of goes up and down. We've got a lot of rollouts here. But the one at the very top, actually the two at the very top, are the ones that we'll be working with a lot with all of our materials. So they keep the most important things at the top. Here we have a drop-down menu that allows us to pick and choose from a number of different shading types. The default shader is Blend, which is a perfectly good shader, and it's a real good general-purpose shader. In fact, let me go ahead and double-click here, and I'm going to bring this up so we can see a little bit bigger. Now, under the basic parameters, we have a number of options here. For example, we have color. In fact, click on Diffuse, and we can pick a very nice color for this. And we also have stuff for self-illumination, which allows it to glow, opacity, which makes it transparent, as well as specular level, which controls shininess. Get a real high, you can get a really high, as well as some other ones here which allow you to see it as wireframe, double-sided, faceted, which means it doesn't do any smoothing, and so on and so forth. Now let's go through some of these shader types so that you'll understand what options you have for shaders. Now the first one, we'll just go down the list. Anisotropic is one at the very top. That's one that you'd want to use when creating metals. Why is that? Because it has a lot of control over your specularity. What it does is it has an anisotropic shader which allows you to vary the way something reflects based upon the angle that you see it. So, for example, if I have it really wide, notice how this highlight just goes wide like any other shader. But if I bring it narrow, it's actually making it more oval. So this is really good for things like metal and some other types of objects. This also has an orientation, so I can twist the anisotropy and so on. We just went through Blend. Let's go ahead and go through the metal shader. Now this one is one that was in the original version of Max, and I think they kind of keep it around just because a lot of people have it in their old scenes. I think a lot of people are using this less and less, but it's still there and it still has some use. It's kind of a dull sheen type of metal that it creates, and it's, you know, you'll see it used every once in a while. Multi-layer. Now this one's pretty cool. It allows you to create actually two types of specularity, which is actually two types of anisotropic specularity. And this is really good for things like car bodies and high-gloss car paint, because it allows you to create kind of like an opalescent sort of finish. In fact, let me show you here. I'm going to go ahead and make one of the specular, turn that up a bit. So I've got kind of a purple highlight here, and then I'm going to make this one yellow. And when I create, and actually bring that up, so if you notice, this one here is yellow and really thin, and this one I have the anisotropy turned down, so I can actually have kind of like an undercoat effect. So if you put it up to there, it's going to go ahead and turn white again. And so that's that. And in complete contrast to that, we have ordinaire blend. A lot of words, but really what that is it's kind of like a blend. It's almost like a cross between a blend and a Lambert, because what it does is it gives you a really soft, smooth, kind of almost a velvety type of surface. It's not a good shiny surface. It's not good for highlights. It's really good for like skin or like cloth and stuff like that, stuff that's not really that reflective or that shiny, and it gives it it's a real nice soft kind of shader. Phong. Okay, that's our standard Phong shader. If anybody's been in computer graphics for more than 10 years, they know Phong fairly well. Strauss is kind of an interesting shader. It doesn't have that many controls. It kind of has it's kind of like a cross between the metal shader and like a blend or a Phong. It's got the glossiness, metalness, and then opacity, and that's just about it. And then the final one is a translucent shader. This one's pretty cool because it allows you to create translucency. So you can do wild glow stick sort of things. So just by changing the translucence color, you can do all sorts of things. And this is really good for glow-in-the-dark type effects. Okay, now we can just go ahead and drag that to the teapot. Now, if you want to see what something looks like, now we've been kind of working in the viewports and in the little renderer here, but we can also render just by hitting, there's actually a couple of buttons here. Let's show you a little bit how to render. We're going to get into the nuts and bolts of rendering later, but we're going to show you just enough so you can start to see your textures on your objects. I'm going to close this, and under rendering we have render, which brings up a big dialog, and we can also get to that dialog by clicking here. There's actually two options. One is brings up the big render dialog, which gives us a bunch of tabs. And really what you want to do is hit this button here which says render. Or just by doing this, that basically takes all of these parameters and just hits the render button for you. So that's our translucent teapot. The next thing we want to get into is maps, and we're going to go ahead and do that in the next movie.